Welcome to the Super Canine Show. I'm your host, William Chandler-Duff, and today we're joined by Jo-Rosie Haffenden. Jo-Rosie has presented multiple TV shows, published 3 books, and has even been invited to speak as an expert in the Houses of Parliament. Not once, but 4 times. She runs her own online dog training academy, which you can learn more about at the jrhacademy.co.uk. Jo-Rosie, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Super Canine Show.
Having me. It's always a pleasure.
Brilliant. So you train in Mondio Ring, right?
I started training in Mondio. Well, I first started doing any kind of protection work with my first dog, who was a registered pit bull. He got me into it, and I didn't really know much about protection sport at that point because I'd come in from a very academic background. I'd got a degree in applied psychology, and then I went and got a postgrad in animal behaviour. So I came into dog training from quite a sort of conventional academic background, and then I got this dog who was just an utter nightmare, who was an ex-fighting pit bull, and he kind of ripped up the rule book that I'd learned academically and threw me into the deep end of working with like a much higher drive, less pet dog, much more complicated dog than I'd ever been taught or ever kind of had the experience of. And when I got him, I was definitely out of my depth. And he really pushed me and challenged me into working in areas that I'd never really sort of thought about. And so I did some IGP with him. Never competed mainly because of his breed, but did some work with him and really enjoyed it. And I'd seen Mondio Ring. In fact, my friend Kelly Dunbar in the States, she had told me about doing Mondio Ring with her pit bull, June. And she had told me, and the way she described it, she was like, honestly, you'd love it. It's so theatrical. It's like themed protection work. And I was like, what do you mean themed? She was like, oh, you could have like a beach theme and you'd do it like, and there'd be sand and the dog would be retrieving sand, spades and buckets, and the decoys would be dressed up, and, and you might have to like run through blow up whales and stuff to get to them. And I was like, this sounds insane. It sounds wicked. And so I started looking it up, found people like Michael Ellis and Forrest McKee and this whole little world. And I was like, oh my God, I desperately want to do that. But Archie definitely wasn't the right dog to do that with. So when Arch got old and I was ready to get another dog, I thought, right, I'm definitely going to get a Mallee and try and go for Mondio Ring. And do Mondio Ring. And at the time, the people that I was training with were like, you shouldn't do this because this doesn't exist in England. Like, there isn't Mondio Ring. You'll have to go abroad and it'll be really difficult. And I was adamant, like, no. And so I found this guy called Nate Florin, who was then pretty unknown. And he was one of only 2 qualified decoys in England. He's Romanian, I believe, or he was qualified in Romania, I think. But then he'd come and he was living in England. So I found him and then spoke to him a lot about the sport. And then was like, right, I'm getting a Malinois and I'm going to do this. And so that's really what got me into it. And then about 4 years after I started training Blake, my Mallee, I moved to Spain. And in Spain, it's so common that even if you go to like the vets all know about Mondio. There's like posters up on the wall about different various Mondio clubs. There was about 4 clubs that I could choose from, all within less than an hour of where I lived. So it's Mondio Ring heaven.
That's the thing about the sport dog world in the UK. It seems to be somewhat smaller than other parts of the world. At least with the bitey sports,
Yeah, I think so. I think PSA has changed that a lot. I think PSA now is so popular. And I think it's a really difficult line. It's a political line. I think it's really difficult to kind of get the balance right, because the decoys for Mondio Ring, the certification for the decoys with Mondio Ring is incredibly difficult. So in order to become a certified decoy for, the guy who gets bitten, for Mondio Ring, you have to pass a written exam. You have to then go and do a physical exam of like stamina and strength where you're running around in a bite suit and getting timed, and you have to do like a 3-minute mile in the bite suit and all this type of stuff. And you then have to go and present some exercises to a judge and get graded, and you have to get above a certain grade in order to sort of qualify with like almost like a permit to then go and do it. And you then have to do a certain number of competitions, club competitions, so just competitions between clubs, and get graded again by the judges over a certain grade to then be considered like a certified decoy. You then have to do an additional qualification with another exam and another physical exam and another presentation to the judge in order to get qualified and certified to do competitions, to decoy for competitions internationally, and then another certification to do like the world, to certify to do like world championships. So it's a really arduous process. It requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of exercise. To become a PSA decoy, you can do it in a weekend. And there's pros and cons to both, obviously. It means that you get really, in order to become in order to work someone's dog for a club, you have to invest a lot of money and a lot of time for something you're not really going to get that well paid for. But it means that in that sport, the quality of the decoys is really high, whereas in PSA, the quality of the decoys can be a lot lower. And in fact, you can still work dogs at club level without any certification at all, having just done like a course for a weekend and messed about with it. You only need the certification in order to do the competitions. So because of that, it means that you've got a lot lower quality of PSA decoys generally overall. Not all of them, there are some fantastic ones, but generally overall. But the flip side of that is that you've got tons of them. And you need tons of them for PSA because unlike Mondio Ring, you need, when it comes to like the later levels, like level 3, you need 5 decoys. So you need a lot more of them. And it also means that the sport can be a lot more popular. It's a lot more accessible. Again, comes with pros and cons, but it's a lot more accessible to everybody because there are so many more clubs and so many more decoys. So I'd say in the UK, PSA now is super common as a result of all of that, whereas Mondio still is incredibly rare. It's harder to find good clubs. It's harder to compete because you normally have to go abroad, but you're going to get really high quality training.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think are some of the skills that you've gained from being in that world, from being a part of the sport dog world, the Mondio Ring?
So many. So I can't even begin. My advice to any dog trainers is always pick a sport, any sport, and train your dog up to competition level, even if you don't compete with it, because you're working to somebody else's criteria. Effectively, you're working to a judge's criteria or to a document that says, for example, in your retrieve, the dog is only allowed to pick up the item and readjust the item once in its mouth. Otherwise, you start to lose points. So your dog can't move on the retrieve, can't move it. And the little things like this, if I was just training my dog to do a retrieve, I wouldn't have even thought, I wouldn't even really give a shit if my dog was chomping on it, as long as it wasn't damaging the item, right? Wouldn't bother me. But to have that as a set criteria and know you've got to lose points means that your training has to go like just up a massive level, because you start having to think about these little details. You start having to go, well, hold on, my sit has to be straight next to me. My dog can't move forward in his positions. My retrieve can't be chompy. So with what I would say is that with pet dog training, when you're making a living training pet dogs, 90% of the training that you do is what I would class level 0 to 8. Okay, so as a brand new dog trainer, if you're only doing like puppy classes and the odd 1-to-1 for loose lead walking, you're only really training people to train their dogs like sit down, stay, maybe walk on a loose lead, recall, maybe settle out in public, and a lot of socialization and exposure. But those types of things, and giving away, crate training maybe, and things like this. But it's you're doing those things and you're doing them repetitively again and again and again with a fairly low benchmark for criteria, because essentially if you teach a dog to sit and stay, the owner normally only wants that around quite low level distractions and for a short amount of time. If you're teaching the dog to sit and lie down, the owner doesn't care whether or not the dog creeps forward into the down, whether or not they go backwards in the down, how the down's done, as long as the dog will eventually go into a down when you say down, etc., etc. So you're training at quite a low benchmark, and you're training the same quite low level behaviours again and again and again. As you get more experience and you take on harder clients, you take on behaviour clients, you take on more difficult training clients, maybe assistance dog work, you then do start to train at a slightly higher level, because you're looking for more, you're looking for higher distractions, you're also looking to stop dogs from doing things, which is much harder than getting them to do things. So you're working on stopping a dog from barking, or feeling threatened towards people, or getting upset and feeling distressed when the owner leaves, etc. And that's really difficult. But again, training wise, it requires the same type of behaviour with quite a low criteria. When it comes to sports training, you're then training from your level 8 right up to your level 20, and you're training things to a level and with a reliability that you would never have to do in the pet dog world. And what that gives you is it gives you the mechanics and the practice, the experimentation, and the fluency of training, because you have to get a certain number of reps in order to get the training to be reliable enough to go into a competition ring, that you're never going to get with pet dog training. And what that provides for trainers is then the ability to find all the level 0 to 8 stuff easy. Super easy. Like I can close my eyes and train loose lead walking in a couple of probably 2 sessions, because I've had to train formal heel work where the dogs, everything from where the dog's bum is to how their tail carriage is to how straight their back is to their head to what their feet are doing, the pace, whether or not they can do it fast, slow, medium, positions within it, retreat, holding something while the dog is while the dog is in heel working around decoys when the dog's motivated to bite, and around clatter sticks and all this. So now if you give me a nice little cocker spaniel that pulls a bit on the lead, suddenly teaching that to walk on a loose lead where you've got no real criteria, it doesn't matter what the dog's doing with its head or with its feet, is absolutely easy. So there's definitely that. The other thing that I would say that I've learned that it's really, really changed my view of and taught me skills that otherwise I don't think you could learn, is when it comes to human aggression. So I do expert witness work for the court. So I work with dogs that get in trouble with the law, and it requires assessing dogs that have usually bitten people and injured people and, even worse sometimes. And I used to do that before I ever did any protection work. And now I've done protection work. I would say that anybody who works in that capacity, anybody who works with aggressive dogs that are aggressive to people, dogs that bite people, should have some form of experience training dogs to do that, working with breeds that are genetically inclined to do that, and getting them to do that with control. Because the skills that it teaches you about, there's a decoy and a trainer in England called Scott, and he works for a company called Ball Vision. Probably the best bite work expert that I've worked with in the whole of Europe, including some big names like Celso and people like that. And he is just phenomenal when it comes to analysing the motivation of dogs. And when I go and work my dogs there, I normally spend the whole day there watching him work a whole load of different dogs of different breeds, like everything from pit bulls to mastiffs to Malinois, Dutch shepherds, like anything that can bite goes there really. And he works each of the dogs so differently in order to motivate the dog to bite properly and to move forward into the bite. And the way that he works defensive breeds is so different to the way that he works offensive breeds, and is so different to the way that he works more dogs that are more game, that see the whole thing as this fun thing, like more play driven. And that's completely different to the way that he works like truly predatory dogs. And watching him motivate the dogs and control those motivations in a way that is where the dog gives 100%, but the owner still can has the ability to control the dogs, teaches you so much about analysing dogs that are out of control and that are doing it off their own backs. It helps you understand the motivations, and it helps you understand and practice and rehearse and watch how to then control the dogs in those situations.
What do you think of using bite suits with aggressive dogs in the pet dog world?
I think it's really difficult. What I would say is there's a few things. So when you're assessing a dog, I would, in some cases, rather have a bite suit than a muzzle, because I think in a lot of cases, particularly with your kind of more sensitive, more tactile breeds like the bully breeds and the mastiffs, muzzling those dogs can inhibit behaviour so dramatically that you can't get a real assessment from those dogs.
Yeah, I saw your post on Facebook the other day that was controversial, but also liked by many, and it was all on that.
And especially, when it comes to assessing dogs legally, 90% of expert witnesses will muzzle the dog as a matter of course because of safety. And my argument is that if our main job is to be able to go to a court and without hesitation say, I've assessed this dog's, the truest nature of the character that I can get from this context of assessment, and I can give you a document that says whether or not this dog is safe to be in the public or not. Doing that in a muzzle to me is a lot of the time, not always, but is a lot of the time just unreliable, just invalid, really, because you're not getting a true assessment. And what I would say is that doing that in that context, in a bite suit, much better, much better. You're going to get a much more reliable assessment of the dog. My reticent about using it for behaviour work is that allowing the dog to practice actually biting with certain breeds and with certain problems and motivations can be intrinsically reinforcing, and can, when a trainer isn't getting hurt by a bite and the dog is able to frequently bite that trainer with the idea of we're going to put this under extinction, and it will bite and realise that doesn't work, and bite and realise that doesn't work, and so I'll try something else and then we can reward something else. That only works on the basis that biting in and of itself is not intrinsically reinforcing. And we know that in a lot of cases, biting and aggression as an act in and of itself is intrinsically reinforcing, particularly for dogs of a certain nature. So I think that if someone's really, really, really well-versed, skillful and strong at assessments, then there are some dogs and there are some contexts where wearing a bite suit for an assessment can be really good. And there are some cases, for example, if you're trying to expose a Romanian street dog to a human for the first time, where it can be a really nice safety precaution and can definitely aid better handling and more exposure of a dog like that. But I think there are also many, many cases where wearing a bite suit in that context and being bitten frequently like that would, you're jeopardizing that dog believing that biting someone isn't a big deal. And then if you were to then take that dog into the public and they were to go and bite someone else, you're then looking at a law, a legal case, because they've bitten someone. Now, if they've just bitten someone 30 times in 3 sessions and it's been no big deal because we're ignoring the behaviour and then rewarding the good behaviour, for that particular dog, it's going to be so practiced, so rehearsed, such not a big deal because it's been ignored, the consequences have been ignored, that it will feel normal and perhaps casual to then bite someone out on the street or whatever. But the dog won't be able to recognise the changing context, and the dog won't be able to go, well, hold on, now I'm out on the street and I've done this exact same behaviour that was being ignored before, but suddenly now I'm being seized by the police and put in a kennels. So I just think it's one of those things that seems like not a big choice, but actually is a massive choice. And for the right dogs with the right risk assessments, it can be a really great tool to use. But with the wrong dogs, again, it can be a very foolish move, and it shouldn't be taken casually, and it shouldn't be a blanket approach to assessing dogs where you go, well, whenever I assess a dog that bites people, I'm going to wear a bite suit and I'm going to do it like this from now on. It should be one of those things that is, carefully put in our toolkit and picked out at just the right opportune moments.
How would you categorize yourself as a trainer?
That's a great question. I don't know. I wouldn't. In terms of like your balanced, the way that I see it is that a lot of positive trainers would classify me as a balanced trainer. A lot of balanced trainers will classify me as a positive trainer. I like to think that I'm unboxable, really. And it's frustrating because it does mean that I get a lot of stick from both sides. I wouldn't, I don't really classify myself as a positive trainer for a few reasons. Number one, I don't like being associated with the culture, and particularly the more extremist culture that is synonymous with that type of trainer. And secondly, because ultimately I don't believe in the idea that the right way, always the right way to train a dog is that lemur approach of the least intrusive, minimally aversive tool first.
Now we've got the life model as well.
Yeah, and we've got the life model, exactly. But I think that there are too many moral, ethical, value-based dilemmas that come up as a result of those questions to oversimplify into I train like this, I'm this type of trainer. For example, when it comes to the freedom of one dog to run off lead on a regular basis, for some dogs, as far as I'm concerned, my value system, my morals, my ethical guidelines that I've given myself mean that for one dog, that thing must be prioritized. And for another dog, that isn't prioritized. And therefore, when I'm putting that into the cogs of the right approach for that dog, for some dogs, I might say the ability for this 1-year-old boxer to run off lead outside of its owner's, to be able to walk. The owner's got a back gate from their garden that takes them straight out onto this beautiful, incredible walk. That's why they got a dog. The ability for them to be able to walk out there with their kids and have that dog off lead running around every day. It's only 1 year old. It's going to live with them for the next 15 years is imperative. That's much more important than some aversive experiences. However, exactly the same situation, but with, I don't know, a 9-year-old basset hound, it's not as important. I might say, well, actually, that dog only really requires the ability to do basset hound stuff and to go off lead and have that type of exercise as an older dog once a week. And the owners could do that in a secure field, and their owners could quite sufficiently live with that dog having less exercise and being on lead for the walks outside of its back gate every day. And then the dog could still come into the house having expended enough exercise in order to have a decent life. Whereas the boxer needs that amount of exercise, otherwise it's going to be absolutely loopy in the house, running around, jumping over everything, ripping up the furniture. So when I put that into my kind of my ethical and moral kind of machine, it then churns out all these other questions where I have to say, well, how sensitive is the dog? What's the owner's training proficiency like? What are the problems? Is it just recall, or is the dog livestock chasing, or is the dog, if the dog's coming out here and has attacked sheep twice, that puts it in a very different category to if the dog is just chasing the odd squirrel and kind of coming back late when called. And what's the dog's trainability like? What's its motivation like? Is it motivated by toys and food, etc., etc.? If I end up with a boxer that isn't particularly motivated by toys and food and is going out and attacking sheep, then in that scenario, I'm likely to say, well, the e-collar has to come in my box of tools here, because actually I could, you could train sheep aversion with an e-collar for that dog. And if that training is done sufficiently, in my experience, by the right person who's well qualified and whose timing is perfect, and they could take that dog away and use the e-collar on that dog, then that dog could hypothetically have 14 years an incredible life where it runs outside the back every single day. The owner then has a dog that they adore that's going to be much more chilled out at home because it's going to be having sufficient exercise, and you know, that is an ethical choice that is, when you put it, you know, when you break it down with all the different complexities of the behaviour and the repercussions of the behaviour, and, you know, what's a sheep life value? Are we saying that the sheep's lives value is less than the dog, and so on? When you put it all into its machine, it's a really complicated choice. But that choice, in my opinion, is sometimes the correct choice, which takes me out of the realm of being able to say that I'm a positive trainer, because there are some cases where I would say, you know what, I think you need to take your dog to an e-collar trainer, a sufficient e-collar trainer, because I do think that if you guys are comfortable with that option, I think that option might be the right option for you and your dog. There are, you know, probably 900 cases where that isn't the option that I would choose, but I would never be able to honestly and transparently say that I would never do that. And therefore, I wouldn't be considered a positive trainer as a result of that. But equally, I probably wouldn't be, if anyone watched my training, it's so heavily motivation based. It's so heavily not using tools, and it's so holistic, and that I don't think anyone would ever call me anything other than a positive trainer if they were to watch me train my dogs. So it's a tricky one. In addition to that, I train trainers, and I have trained trainers now for, you know, nearly 15 years. And what I would say is that I do also believe that it is my ethical responsibility to train trainers about these tools. I recently was hung out to dry because I've done a loose lead course that's in a lot of detail in the academy. And by the time I finish that loose lead course, it will have probably about 49 videos. They're all around 10 minutes long. And it's behind a paywall because you have to subscribe in order to be a member of the academy. And I've done that on purpose, and I wouldn't ever release the content that's within that out to the public, out to any old trainer, because it needs to be seen in context. One of the videos within the loose lead walking course was a video on prong collars. And within that video, I go through the science of prong collars and what the studies and the experiments have taught us, as well as what other experts say about prong collars, giving the pros and cons of that piece of equipment. I do the same video for harnesses, for halty head collars, for slip leads, and for leads, normal leads. But prong collars is included in that because it is something that's so prevalent in loose lead walking, especially in the States. And so I go through the prong collar, and included in that, because I feel like it's my responsibility to educate people so that they understand the use of tools and the use of these different things, even if I'm not recommending using it, I talk about the conditioning phase of the prong collar and how I feel that really is incredibly important if we are working with a dog that's being walked on a prong collar, or an owner that feels the need to use that tool as management. It's important that the prong collar is conditioned in the right way so that the dog doesn't risk injury when it goes out, because the biggest problem with that tool is when owners just chuck it on their dog, take their dog out, and it's maybe dog reactive or frustrated or chases traffic. And if the dog hasn't been sufficiently conditioned to the prong collar, then the dog's likely to go out and lunge at the traffic and then really cause injury to themselves. And there's a prevention strategy that you can have, which is to sufficiently condition the dog inside the house before using that tool. So I go through that in the video, and I say, look, I don't recommend using these. I don't like using prong collars. However, this is how I would condition it. And I give an example with my own dog, with Hope, my bulldog mix, and I say, you know, this is how you put it on. This is where it sits on the neck. This is how I would condition it, which is with a leave it food exercise, which teaches the dog, where the dog kind of is given an opportunity to experiment with the tactile nature of the collar, and in a very low arousal state, be able to negotiate, kind of to feel the pressure coming on and going off of the collar, in a way that is really safe and really controllable, and where the dog really is controlling that, and where the owner is given guidance as to how the dog is feeling based on their body language in that context as to whether or not it's an appropriate management tool for that dog before you take that dog out. Someone took a screen recording of like a tiny bit of that video and then posted it online, and it went crazy, and people were like, oh my God, I can't believe you're teaching people to use prong collars. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to give people the sufficient tools so that when someone walks into their class and they've got their dog on the prong collar, you know how it works, you know the way it works, you know whether or not the owner has sufficiently conditioned that dog, you know, because ultimately most trainers aren't working with their own dogs. They're working with other people's dogs. And if you're working with someone else's dogs, you have to, even if you hope to manipulate and change their value system and their moral system through education over time, you are still working with somebody else's dog under their moral code. So if that person has decided, I've done my research and I have made the decision that I only feel safe and that the public is only safe when I take this dog out on a prong collar, and once you've shown me how to teach this dog to be on a flat collar, then I will happily take this prong collar off. But for the time being, as a management tool, I can only walk this dog and feel safe in a prong collar. Then it's your responsibility as a professional to understand how that tool works. And so I think it's important to educate people on everything. And trainers should be educated on everything and then make their own moral choice and have their own ethical guidelines, and take the time to really invest in thinking about what your moral hierarchy is, and you know what in what situations you might be challenged in terms of your own moral hierarchy, rather than the way it was when I was learning, which is, you know, you go into a university lecture and you say, I want to understand about how this tool works. And they say, no, we don't cover that tool. No, I don't want to teach you about that. No, you know, we don't talk about punishment. We don't talk about that stuff because we've decided it's not ethical, and therefore we're not going to teach you about it and let you make your own ethical decision. But as a result of that, as a result of all of that, I'm put in a box where a lot of the positive trainers find me to, you know, that I talk too much about punishment and too much about the tools and all of that sort of thing to be for them to be comfortable with. And therefore I've definitely been, you know, as a result of that, I've definitely been chucked out of conferences and told that I can't speak in certain places, and you know, thrown out of that kind of social group to some degree. But in the same time, I don't really belong in the balance camp because I don't train with those contingencies either.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation for you. You know, you're not really in one camp or the other. And
what I hold true and what I always think about is that I always think that I've always made certain that I put the truth and honesty of what I believe, given my experiences and given my knowledge, above everything else. And I feel like I can justify that merit on the merit that if I had stayed in the positive camp, there is a well-known UK TV show that I would have been on, and there are, you know, many different opportunities to speak at different conferences and with different people, and there are a lot of people who would be waving my flag and massively supporting me, and I would earn a lot more money. But I'm willing to sacrifice that money and that opportunity in order to tell the truth. And when I go to bed at night, that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I can hold my head up and go,
you're aiming in the direction of the objective truth rather than some politically correct truth. You know, it's always the way. That's a good way to. What?
Or that financial motivation.
Yeah.
I work with lots of trainers that understand that it's a grey area, but aren't willing to shift their public message as a result of the worry about the drop of their reputation and the financial deficit that would cause, which I just think is really sad and immoral in my mind.
So you have used prong collars and electric collars personally yourself?
Well, I use the prong collar to show that exercise on my academy, and I have used an e-collar on one of my own personal dogs for livestock chasing, because she chased after a sheep. And she was incredibly motivated by sheep. And that was when I just moved to the UK. In Spain, it wasn't a problem because of the way that livestock is treated around there. They're grazing, but they free roam graze. So they move, and they have livestock guardian dogs. And so if you're out for a walk and you hear the bells of some goats, you can guarantee within a few seconds you're going to see the livestock guardian dogs coming running up the hill. Whoa, 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 whoa. All the dogs, irrespective of, even when I've had some fosters that have been highly dog aggressive, respect the livestock guardian breeds. And we'll just go, fair fucks, I'm not coming anywhere near you. They protect the livestock come trundling past, and there's never a problem. And then when I moved here, obviously we've got captive sheep that live in little fields with picket fences around them, and very often public footpaths that go directly through those fields. I was in Scotland, and a friend of mine was walking the dogs, not me. And he was on the beach in Scotland, actually. But there was like a weird little wall, and little did he know that behind that wall was some sheep. And it was like a kind of falling down wall. And Hope jumped over that wall and chased a sheep. Luckily, she didn't kill it, but she chased that sheep up the hill, which is, it's one of those things that to me is completely unethical, because the sheep have got as much right to feel safe and to have decent, safe lives as the dogs do. And so when that happened once, and then I noticed, like, I sheep tested her, so I noticed that whenever I was around livestock, she was like just absolutely on it. And living here, and especially as I was just about to move to the Yorkshire moors, where there are wild sheep, I'd spent 4 years teaching her a really good recall. She's got a sick recall. Like, her recall is amazing. I can call her off dogs. I can call her off anything, really. Like, she's got a great recall, but not on livestock. On livestock, she goes into full predation, and she will chase it, and she would otherwise kill a sheep, I think, if she was given the opportunity. And so I did make the decision to condition her to an e-collar, which I did under the guidance of a friend of mine, Alice, who's been training on e-collars for years and years and years. And then I did cheaper version with her, which has, in inverted commas, worked, in the sense of she doesn't wear an e-collar now, as people will see on all my stories and on all my videos. And it has worked in the sense of when she sees livestock and she sees sheep. Obviously, I'm still going to put her on the lead when I've got, when I'm in a situation. But if she was to escape into a field of sheep now, I don't think she would chase them, because when she sees them now, she's just like, she literally was like, don't want that anywhere near me. No, thanks. And that required a very short amount of time of something that wasn't even, I wouldn't have even said it was painful or particularly, it surprised me how quickly it worked and how effective it was, and how much of a kind of, like, how little of a big deal it was. I was like, that's it. That's the training. That's done then. Like, I don't know why I've avoided this for so long, because it's such a small thing. For her to have now a life where I can take her out into the moors, where, me and my boyfriend climbed a mountain a few weeks ago, and I can take the dogs with me, and I can have them all off lead, and they can all run, and she can have the life that she deserves where she's off lead and I'm not concerned, and she's as good as gold.
So what did the electric collar training look like with the sheep? Did you first condition her to some obedience commands with the electric,
condition
and
then
use it for the sheep version after that, or was it more of a very direct association? You go near the sheep and the sheep bites you back.
No, I didn't do it that way. That's the style that I always thought I'd do it that way, because I've researched the shit out of e-collars for like 10 years now. And obviously I went over to Michael Ellis's and saw them use their e-collars, and, spoken obviously for long amounts of time with people like Ivan and all kinds of people about different uses of the collar and how to use it. And in my head, scientifically, I thought the most effective way of doing it would be for the sheep to bite her back, for it to be an act of God, and to do it like that. But actually, Hope was extremely sensitive to the e-collar on a 6. We conditioned her on a 6 on a mini educator.
And what brand was
mini educator? So it goes up to 100. And we conditioned her on a 6, and she was incredibly sensitive to it. I think maybe being a bully breed, they are generally very, very she wasn't offended by it at all, and I think she quite enjoyed it when we did the conditioning process of Alice. She quite enjoyed it. She was just loving the training. I think it added some clarity for her, and she kind of And then we took her to the field, and when she showed interest, like approaching interest to the sheep, I would recall her, and if she wasn't able to disengage with the sheep, we'd use the e-collar in that way. And literally within 2 walks, I then took the e-collar off her and carried on doing the training with no problem. I had her on a long line and had the long line slack so that she was able to do anything. And by the 3rd walk, she didn't need the e-collar on, and she was 100% engaged with me and no longer engaged with the sheep.
Very good.
Very good. I mean, and so it is a tough one for me. But would I recommend a pet dog owner buying an e-collar? No. Do I think they need to be restricted? Absolutely. I think they do need some level of regulation. I think they need restriction in terms of quality, in terms of making sure that people. So it's impossible to buy those cheap Chinese collars. I don't think any kind of automated collar, such as a bark collar, should be used, because the technology isn't there for them to be reliable enough, and other noises and other. When the dogs bark for different motivations, it's still going to go off, which is completely unethical. And on top of that, I think that there should be a register of qualified e-collar trainers that are allowed to train these things. I don't think that your average Joe owner should be allowed to do an online course or read the back of the box and train their dog. And I think more than anything, the dogs need to be assessed by someone qualified in order to say that this is the right tool for this dog.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, like the cheap Chinese collars, just £20 off of Amazon or wherever it is. That there should be some regulation as to the quality that is enforced. But in terms of like having to get some certificate to use the electric collar and some education in how you should be using the electric collar, there's like as you probably know, there's a lot of different ideas around how to use the electric collar, and there's how that would work is. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that would really work very well.
For me, it's not so much about teaching trainers how to use these tools. It's about ensuring that they have the ability to train without them. So, if it was up to me, if I was the Court of Justice when it came to these sorts of things, I think that a trainer should have a license. I think that as soon as you start training for your professional services, we should be licensed in some way, even if it's literally just a membership number. Right? It doesn't mean you have to train in any particular way. It just means that you are now on a register of people who charge for your services. And therefore, there is a paper trail if somebody wants to make a complaint or if something really awful happens. And then you need to have been training for a certain period of time without the use of aversive tools before you learn to use them. And it, like you say, there's hundreds of different schools of thoughts in terms of how you condition them and how you use them. And, I know that lots of people use them for sports training, and that's very different to using them for things like what I'm talking about with livestock and predation. And that's very different to using it for your, general domestic obedience. And, there's hundreds of different schools of thought, and there's loads of science that kind of pushes you in one way or another, because none of the science is particularly direct, valid and reliable. And so to my mind, it's not necessarily about saying, well, right, you, William, now have to come and do this course on this tool, because arguably you could say the same about a flat collar, and you could say the same about a harness, and you could say the same about a halty. And then we're starting to go into that, really high level regulation, helicopter regulating, where every practice that you do is denoted by somebody else's ethics and morals and values and experiences, right? And then who gets to play God? That's the problem. But I do think that the responsibility is much heavier when you're using a tool like an e-collar for it to go wrong and for it to ruin a dog. I do think that that's seen a lot, sadly, in dog training. And I think that a lot of balance trainers who do use these tools would also agree that, unfortunately, it's those people that are ruining it for everybody else in terms of the reputation of these tools. And I do think that could be significantly reduced if trainers were only able to use those tools after they'd learned to train sufficiently without them. I think that the biggest problems I see, without a doubt, come from trainers who have never learned how to train using, pure motivation methods, using just, motivating the dog and using your body and using, the pressure of eye contact and the pressure of verbal cues that have contingencies like timeouts and things like that. If you use all of that and you become skilled in using all of that prior to using the tools, then I think you end up with very different trainers to trainers who learn using the e-collar. Because it can feel like a magic button, I think, for a lot of trainers. I work with trainers every day from both sides from both camps, and a lot of the balance trainers. I've worked quite recently with quite a few positive trainers who have said, you know what, I've never used an e-collar before, I've never used any of these tools before, but I've got this one case, and I think I'm going to take this case to an e-collar trainer and start kind of the process of learning how to train with these tools. And the both of them have come back and said the same as what I see as being one of the problems, which is that as soon as you use it, you're like, oh my God, it works so quickly. And it's so when it's used well, and by well I mean when it's skillfully applied with the right timing in the right cases where the dog's been assessed to be the right dog and it's used at the right level and it's the right collar and the right context and all that stuff, it can be so effective so quickly that it can feel like someone's hit a magic button. And I can see how that can become very addictive for a trainer. And they can go, why am I not using this with every single dog? Why am I not just starting off? Why have I bothered to try and do this loose lead walking? Why have I bothered to try and change the contingency so the dog's no longer barking at the window? Why have I bothered to do all of this when I could have done it like that, boom, with an e-collar? And so I think that when people learn that initial thing of doing it, boom, with an e-collar, then the other methods suddenly seem really slow and heavy duty and laden with lots of responsibility and repetition, etc., etc. Whereas when you come from it from the other point of view and you've learned to use motivation and so on and so forth, and you've learned to see how reliable and steady and how good that can be and how effective and how quick it can be as well, then I think that you see the e-collar as just another tool in the toolbox that occasionally is the right tool for the right dog rather than a blanket approach to every dog you see.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's something that all trainers should do is, first of all, learn how to train dogs without the use of electric collars ever.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily say without the use of aversives. But when I do say aversives, I don't mean that we're using some high level aversives on the lead, or but a lot of my training, for example, when I'm teaching behaviors, I'll use physical manipulation, negative reinforcement on very, very light, low levels. In the context of, say, playing a game, and that takes a good amount of skill on its own. I think simultaneously learning negative reinforcement, punishment, all the positive reinforcement based stuff as well, schedules of reinforcement, differential reinforcement, all of that. I think that's a good place to start. And then the electric collar, you learn about that as an option towards the end of your
exactly at the end of your training, when you're already skilled and when you're already really good. I think if and if you want to, because I trained pet dogs before I trained pet dog trainers for years and years and years, and very successfully without ever using tools. And I would say that probably at least 90% of your average Joe nicely chosen pet dog, your Cavapoos and your mini schnauzers and your like these types of nice easy pet dogs can be trained perfectly well, quickly, sufficiently, if you're skilled, without the use of those tools.
Absolutely.
And therefore, if we can do it so easily like that, then I don't see the point of using, I just don't see there is no point unless it's, really increasing clarity, and that's necessary for whatever reason. Like most pet dogs don't need it. And so I think a lot of pet dog trainers go, like, I come across one case in 200 cases where I say I can't train this dog with the skills that I've got in a way that is absolutely ethical and effective. And therefore, rather than learn how to use those tools, I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to give it to other people who already know how to use those tools. And I think that's the choice of every dog trainer. And that's certainly the choice that I made when I practiced, was, when I was practicing really regularly, when I was running the school for dogs. I just said, like, if ever I come across a case that I can't fix, that I can't sort out in a way that's ethical, within an ethical time frame for that particular owner, then I'll send it to someone that I think can help them. But 99% of my cases I'm skilled enough that I can sort out without it. And therefore, I'm just not going to bother learning to use the tools and stuff, which is definitely where I was when I was at school for dogs. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that choice. That's a moral, value, ethical dilemma of the trainer to choose. But the trainer will only get to that point of choosing that and making that choice if they've been sufficiently educated in how to train dogs without the use of those tools.
At what point do you think euthanasia is an option when you're training a dog with behavioural issues?
I think if there is no way of it always comes down to hope when it comes to behaviour for me. So not hope as in my dog hope, but hope as in hope, the hope of something. So essentially, if the dog is suffering, or if there is a public or private safety matter, i.e., let's say we've got 3 dogs and one of them is suffering, as in they've got such bad OCD type behaviour, no medication has been able to be effective for that dog. We've tried to train the dog out of it using numerous different things, and we don't have a way out at this point for that dog, and its OCD is really bad and it's suffering mentally, like it's fly snapping every time it comes out of the house, or it's shadow chasing to the point where the dog's owners are having to put a mask on it so that it can't see when it comes outside of the house to go to the toilet, which I have had cases like that before. So if it's got a painful, if there's if it's really suffering mentally, or if there's a risk to public safety, for example, the dog is full on attacking strangers, and is, lives with its owner, who is fairly feebly handed because maybe they're old and they don't have sufficient control of that dog, but the dog's very attached to them, and therefore that doesn't matter what you tell them about hiring dog walkers, etc. That they are going to be walking that dog out of their house every single day, and that that you can't really trust them to put a muzzle on the dog, because they won't put a muzzle on the dog, or it's not ethical to do so because the dog absolutely hates the muzzle. So they're taking that dog out, and you can see the dog's already nailed a couple of people, and you can see that there's quite a high risk that dog is going to nail somebody again. Or perhaps you've got a resource guarding dog that is so, that's hospitalised its owner 3 or 4 times, and you've put in a lot of work, but you can tell that there's still a really high risk and there's children in the house, etc., etc. If you've got these issues where the dog is really suffering, or there's a private risk to the people in the house, or there's a public risk to the people out and about, and what you then have to look at is risk versus hope. What is the percentage of risk that this is going to happen again, this is going to go wrong, and what is the potential hope for a training outcome whereby this is going to be prevented so that it never happens again. And you have to balance up that model and say, what is the risk to hope? If the risk of the dog, let's say, biting one of the kids in the house over a resource is really high because there's 5 children in the house, all under the age of 10, and the dog is a young Cocker Spaniel, they're going to have to live with this dog for the next 15 years. The dog's a very busy dog, and he's resource guarding 3 or 4 times a day and clearly finding it, incredibly motivating. And it resource guards food, and it resource guards wrappers, and it resource guards toys. And you've got all these kids in the house. So the risk of that happening again is very, very high. And the risk of it causing injury and having one of those children ending up with life-altering, problems is very, very high. And the hope of changing this little busy working red Cocker Spaniel and changing its behaviour so that it doesn't resource guard, particularly given the owner's time, etc., 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 is very, very low. Then essentially you've only got 2 options. You've got the option of euthanasia, or you've got the option of rehoming. And then you have to decide whether or not rehoming is an ethical choice for that particular dog, and whether or not it's likely that you're going to get a gold ticket home for a highly resource guarding working Cocker Spaniel, and how quickly you can get that dog out of that home and into that new home. If the hope for that dog to either go to a new home or have its behaviour adjusted is low and the risk is high, then that becomes a case where euthanasia might be considered an ethical decision. And that's based not on the dog's welfare, but on the welfare of the people in that situation. And in order of, safety of the people. And it's one of those shitty things where, no, it's not ideal for the dog. In the perfect world for the dog, you just find it a nice brand new home that has got the time to train it, and who can train it in a way where it becomes safe in an environment where it's no longer under siege of all these kids. But in reality, the safety of the owners has to come first. And then with your suffering cases, they're normally more clear cut, if I'm honest, and they're easier to go into because those usually are the welfare of the dog and not the human. Because in those cases, like the OCD case that I described, which is actually a real life case that I had once, where this German Shepherd was shadow chasing so badly that it could only go outside if it was wearing a mask, like it couldn't see otherwise, and it was waking up to shadow chase, and it was just obsessed. And we tried all the options training wise, and the dog was only 18 months old, and it wasn't ethical. That dog was suffering so badly mentally, and the owners were absolutely destroyed. They were distraught, but that was the right ethical choice for the dog.
So when it sounds like you're saying euthanasia is basically the last option, and it definitely is, and it should be for everyone. But like, for example, with the German Shepherd you were talking about, would you consider using some aversive?
Absolutely, and I've always said that in terms of where
euthanasia is the option.
Yeah, where it's ethical to do so, we need to, life should be respected at all costs. And what I would say is that I've worked with enough dogs. I worked with a visualer once that had jumped out of a building, been knocked over by a car, and then ended up being buried alive by the debris, broken both her back legs. And she still managed to drag herself out with her front legs and get onto the road where someone stopped and picked this dog up and in the end rehabilitated it, and I helped work with its new owner. But in my experience, 99.9% of the time, dogs will always choose life. They'll always choose life. Like when it comes to that ethical decision as to whether or not the dog's going to live or die, they will grasp onto life at all costs. And I think it's a matter of respect for the species that we do our utmost to keep dogs alive. And I think you have to go to bed at night knowing that you've tried everything that is ethical to try. There are cases where it's definitely not ethical, and it wouldn't be appropriate or necessarily relevant to try different types of training using more aversive methods. But there are also definitely cases where to me it's a no-brainer that we would use it, and it's frustrating. Again, it's one of those controversial ones I get in trouble for talking about, but I always find it quite distressing that rescue centres are so averse to using anything like this when a lot of the dogs in their care are suffering being in kennels and their behaviour is worsening, but they're not able to rehome it as a result of a behaviour that could be prevented or changed using different methods with some of these dogs. And and it becomes political. And when I've spoken to the top people in those rescues, they agree that the reason that they can't use that type of training is not because they don't think it will work or they don't think it's better for the dogs, but it's solely down to the fact that rescues run on donations, and people won't donate to a rescue that uses those types of tools because the media campaign against those tools is so strong now. And that just is what it is. You can totally see it from both sides, can't you? You know, if I was on the board of directors for those rescues, I'd be saying the same. I'd be saying, well, we're better off having the money in the bank that we can look after these dogs and give them some hope, than risk our whole reputation and not having any donations, and then we can't look after any dogs. And so you can see it definitely from their perspective. But then obviously when the big rescues, which they do, ardently stand against certain training practices, then it makes it very difficult to give a message to the public that it can be more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult situation with the rescues. What are your thoughts on shaping?
I love shaping. I think it can be absolutely fantastic. It's one of those things that requires a lot of skill. It requires a lot of frustration management. For the right dog, it can be brilliant. I've used it tons and tons and tons and tons and tons. And with certain dogs, I absolutely love it. You have to be careful with free shaping, that you give it a context and a cue. Otherwise, you end up with dogs that just throw loads of different behaviour at you. I think it can be one of the most effective way to train detailed behaviour. So, for example, if the behaviour is to pick up the red washing on the floor but not the yellow washing, and put the red washing in the basket and ignore the yellow washing, or something like that, I think it can be brilliant for training that detailed behaviour. It can also be better than I think anything else when it comes to polishing behaviour. So, for example, if I have like a little error, like I had a little error with my dog's stand, so her sit. So she'd sit, and I accidentally had trained so that she did her, when she went from her stand to her sit, she'd lift her paw up, and she just had a little bit of paw lift. And so shaping for things like that can be brilliant for just fixing little errors that are so detailed and so like minor. And it can be really good for training. Like, I love using shaping. The cons of using shaping, they're not really cons, but the things you just have to make sure you're skilled in it, because when you've got a dog that gets easily frustrated, the lack of direction can become a problem, because there isn't very much clarity when you're shaping like that. So, you know, you're asking the dog to use their imagination and think about what they perceive this context to be telling them to do, and then you're having to rely solely on your ability to assess what criteria is going to be successful. So you have to say, well, you know, what you have to be really, really good at looking at the dog and going, right, what is this dog actually likely to do here? What is likely to be a successful criteria in the right direction of where I want to go? And if you're good at that, then shaping can be so fast to get a complicated behaviour or to fix a little behaviour problem. But if you are not good at that, you end up with just a dog that starts to just get so frustrated and barky and irritated and will redirect on you. And, you know, it can be really unethical when it's done badly. But when it's done well, I think it's a brilliant method of training.
So this kind of, I don't know, it kind of ties into the last question on shaping. But when would you add a cue to a behaviour? Like in what stage of the learning process would you add it?
It depends, but it's generally speaking, I've talked about this quite a lot. I like adding cues. I like cues to be verbal cues to be synonymous with a behaviour during training quite early on. I don't have any problem with that. Now, when I first started training, I was very much taught that you don't label it till the dog loves it, and you wait until the behaviour is perfect before you start bringing in the cue. So, for example, if you've got a recall cue, you would only, if your recall criteria is for the dog to, I don't know, be 1 metre away from you, or to touch your hand, or let's say it's to touch your hand, then you would only say Fido come if you thought that the dog, if there was an 80% chance that the dog's going to touch your hand. But the more experienced I've got, the less I really ride by that now at all. And I normally bring in cues as soon as I believe that adding verbal direction is going to increase clarity. So sometimes right at the very beginning, if I'm asking the dog to sit, and if I'm, I don't know, let's say I'm just luring the dog and I'm luring the dog to sit, I'll bring it in initially straight away, sit, because I'm saying to him, I'm trying to provide him a context where I'm saying to them, I'm asking you to do something now. I'm giving you a command. Like, you have to listen to the command and do something. What is it that you think I'm asking you to do? And sometimes that can add real clarity to a dog. I've definitely seen that add clarity, like when we're doing, for example, an indication over a bit of Kong, if we're doing some scent detection, and the dog has been giving like an indication, but it's not been great and it's not been very proofable, it's not had any duration, then going, come on, Fido, find it. The dog can go, oh, you want me to do the thing? And it can definitely bring in that clarity, because dogs are so visual when it comes to training and so context-based when it comes to training. I think that adding the verbal we shouldn't put cotton wool around it, because I don't think that it's when to add the verbal that is the problem. I think it's when to fade the other shit that is what people get wrong. So I think that it doesn't really matter when you bring the cue in, like bring it in right at the very beginning, down, 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 right from the word go, or wait until the dog's going down and then go down and try and fade some of your prompts. But it's how the prompts are faded and when the prompts are faded that I think trainers really come unstuck with. Because I think that when people talk about when to bring in a verbal cue, they're often in their head that a lot of the rules around bringing in a verbal cue is under this notion that when you bring the verbal cue in, all the other prompts stop. Because the old method was to, I don't know, you get your treat, put it on the dog's nose, put the dog into a sit, feed them the treat, repeat this 10 times. Now, take everything away and say to the dog, sit, and see if they go, that was the behaviour I was doing before that got reinforced, and therefore now I'm going to sit, good dog, feed. And you can do it like that, and you can add lots and lots of repetition. But that works under the ability that we're just going to suddenly remove all the prompts, and we don't really have to do that. And a much better way to train in my head is to do it all together. The likelihood of pet dogs needing to have all those prompts faded is slim to none anyway. Like, when is there a point where our little schnauzer Otis, when is there ever going to be a situation where the kids or Ben or I can't show the dog a treat and go sit? I could do that for the rest of the dog's life, or point the finger, or do whatever you're going to do. So the gestures and the words can be synonymous with each other. The dogs don't have to learn on verbal only unless you're competing with them. And if you are competing with them, I think a better process is to fade the other stuff than to just drop it out. And if you're going to fade it, then you can fade it. You can bring the verbal cue in straight away. It can be synonymous with all the prompts, and you can teach the dog actually that it all means the same thing. When I say sit, that is predictive that I'm now going to bring the food forward, show you the food, and put you into the lure. And I can do that enough times that then I'll start to go sit and just give you a little bit less of a prompt, or wait and see if you'll do it. And then if you don't, give you the prompt so that the dog can understand the verbal cue. It doesn't need to be something that comes in later after the behaviour is perfect.
I completely agree with that. Let's see. LRS. Mm-hmm. The least reinforcing scenario.
I know LRS.
What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts on it are that practically in training, it's very difficult to use in a way that's effective. I don't think for me, it's not. It was brought in, I think, Ken Ramirez is the one who popularised it. And that was considered like an alternative sometimes to to try and provide a bit more clarity to a dog when you're playing the hot and cold game just with hot. And for me, I think that I don't think that it adds any clarity to anything. I don't think I've ever seen it used well. And I think in the vast majority of cases, it reduces clarity and confuses a dog. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of originates from the marine mammal trainers, SeaWorld and all of that.
Exactly.
And yeah, you don't really see it much in dog training, but there's probably some good reasons for that, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand it properly, and I think it's really difficult to practically apply.
Absolutely. Continuous versus intermittent schedules of reinforcement. This is apparently a trending topic, but when I say intermittent, this can be fixed ratio, variable, or a truly random schedule. For you, what are the benefits and disadvantages of them, and when might you choose to use one over the other?
I'll always, or I'll 90%. So for me, a lot of training, especially at the beginning of training a dog to do anything, is about repetition. It's about getting as many reps in, cookies per minute, motivating as many reps as possible. So during that primary learning phase, I like to keep dogs on a continuous schedule of reinforcement, because the benefits of putting a dog on a schedule is resistance to extinction, and proofing for reliability.
And also, just to interrupt, that's also the disadvantage as well.
Exactly, and in addition to that, it's also when you're putting a dog on a variable schedule, or you're starting to fade food or fade motivation, or fade punishment if you're going to use it in that other with the other contingency, then you're starting to look at proofing, and you're starting to look at this idea of something being obligatory. So for me, schedules come in. So for me, like putting a dog on just a consistent reinforcement schedule where the dog gets reinforced every time for doing the behaviour when you're first training something is for me, it's a 101. That's 101. It's definitely worth doing. You're getting in loads of motivation. You're teaching the dog very, very clearly, this is what we want from you. Or, if you're using this for punishment, then I suppose you'd be teaching the dog, this is exactly what we don't want from you. And it's absolute clarity. There's no question. It's, there's zero room for error. It's exactly right. When the dog learns it, when the dog knows it well, there's a level of expectation. And that you move the dog onto the basis. You say, can you do it? And the dog says, yes, I can do it. Then you say, can you do it here, there, and everywhere? And that's generalization. So you move the dog from the learning phase into the generalization zone, where you say, can you do it here, there, and everywhere? And the dog says, yes, I can still do it here, there, and everywhere, as long as you feed me for it. Fine, brilliant. Then you say to the dog, can you do it when all this other shit's going on? And will you do it when I tell you to do it, irrespective of what's going on? And that's when you move into the proofing zone. Now, to me, when I first move my dog into the proofing zone, when I'm putting them into the harder environments, there isn't an obligation for the dog to do it. I'm not at a point where I say to the dog, you have to do it. Instead, I'm saying to the dog, I still want you to do it. And if you do it, you get paid for it. But there does come a point in 90% of dogs, can't think of any exceptions actually, so I'm going to say 100% of dogs, there does come a point where some cues become obligatory. They have to. And there comes a point where you say to the dog, you have to do this no matter what, even if you don't want to. So the best example, the easiest example is recall, isn't it? So you say, you have to come back when I call you, because otherwise you're going to get hit by a car, or otherwise you're going to chase a horse and get kicked by a horse, or you're going to, get lost. So you have to come back to me. So then it's no longer about, I'm going to pay you to do it and you need to do it. Instead, it comes to, you have to do what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it, even when you don't want to do it. And when that happens, we need to mess about with contingencies a little bit more, because there needs to be a consequence for if you don't do it. And that's when we start messing about with variable reward schedules, because we start saying, I don't always have treats on me, I don't always have toy on me, I don't want you to do it because you think I'm going to give you something that you want. I need you to do this because I've asked you, and I need you to do it just because I've asked you. And so when you move into like obligation, that's when I'll start moving on to variable reward schedules. And I think that in practice, when we kick Skinner out the window and say, this is very diminishing, it's too simplistic, and let's have a look at the overall dog. In practice, I think we have to start thinking, well, I'm gonna toggle between different schedules of reinforcement, intermittent and just random, really, where we're moving between, I'm going to reinforce you every minute to every 12 commands to just when I feel like it. And when we do that, we have to toggle between how likely it is for the dog to get the reward in order to improve the amount of dopamine that's released when they hear the cue, and to increase the work ethic and improve the reliability of the dog. And that is where, as trainers, we have to feel a dog and have decent skills and decent instincts, because we have to be able to get those schedules just right on the edge to get the optimum amount of work ethic off the dog, to make the behaviour as reliable as possible with as fewer external reinforcement opportunities as possible. And we have to, and often the environment will denote that we have to go back to more consistent schedules of reinforcement, and then toggle, and then back, and then toggle, and then back, and then toggle. And that's before we bring in any negative contingencies like punishment, where we say to the dog, I know you can do it. I know you can do it in all these different situations. I've taught you that you have to do it even when you don't want to do it. So now there is a consequence if you don't do it. And a lot of dogs don't ever need that, to be honest, but some dogs do require that. So so when it comes to schedules of reinforcement, I think that you have to be able to have decent enough skills and the ability to feel your dog training in order to know how and when to reduce the external reinforcement opportunity and continue to ask for the behaviour, and to be able to really teeter on the optimum amount of dopamine and work ethic that the dog's going to give you before they start getting demoralised and going, I can't bother to do this because it's loads of energy and I don't get anything for it. One of my favourite tricks to do when I'm doing that sort of thing with pet dogs especially is to make the owner go out on the walk before the dog and hide rewards around the walk. And so then they recall the dog maybe 3 times. And on the third time, even though the owner looks to the dog as if they've got no food, no treats, nothing, suddenly out of this tree comes a Tupperware box with a load of food in it, and stuff like that. So that the dog is always on the edge of thinking, even though it looks as though nothing good's going to happen, it still might.
Yeah. What do you think of jackpots?
Yeah, I think it's I think jackpots can be great as long as they are actual jackpots. I think 5 treats instead of 1 treat isn't a jackpot for me. A jackpot for me is giving the dogs whole meal in a bowl that is synonymous with meal time in the middle of a walk when the dog did not expect it. For me, jackpot's about expectation, because it's about the dog getting significantly more than what it expected, or getting something that's significantly improved on what it expected, because it's about delivering that real emotional, what the fuck, oh my God, I cannot believe this has just happened. And unless you've got something that's ultimately good enough to deliver that feeling, then going, I'm going to give him a jackpot by just giving him a handful of food that's more than the smaller handful of food, that's not a jackpot. The jackpot has to deliver something that is emotionally incredibly unexpected and startles the dog in a good way.
What do you think is the best way to teach the out command? Or how do you teach the out command? What's your go-to approach for?
It depends on the dog. So it depends on the dog, and it depends on their what their motivation is regarding the part of the bite. So what I mean by that is that if I've got a possessive dog that wants to obtain and maintain whatever it is it's biting, I'm going to teach that differently to if I've got a dog that wants to grab and hold with resistance. i.e. a pit bull or a bully breed, and I'm going to train that differently to if I've got a herding breed who enjoys the actual crunch of the bite, and the possibility to fight something. So the three those three motivations are, I mean, there are others as well, but those three significant motivations will change how I teach the out. Because if you've got a dog who is incredibly possessive and who ultimately wants to possess and probably parade whatever it is, then we have to think of how we're going to incorporate that as a contingency in outing, in which case what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to have two toys, ideally two people, and the dog runs in and bites the first toy and gets a level of fight, etc. I'm then going to that toy is then going to go dead, i.e. the person's going to reduce any ability for the dog to have any purchase or any resistance on it, so the dog doesn't feel like they have obtained it. And the point of that, part of the point of that, and part of the psychology of that, is that the dog has never obtained that object. So possession is 9/10 of the law when it comes to dogs. And maybe a dog like a Rottweiler is a great example that do tend to be very possessive. Until you've let go of that toy, the toy is still both of yours. It doesn't belong to anybody. You're fighting as to who has that toy. And so when I'm teaching a dog like that and out, I'm going to usually do it where the dog bites the toy and the person that they've bitten the toy with fights the dog for obtaining that object for a very short amount of time, and then moves their hands towards the dog's mouth so that they obtain more. They've obtained more of the item than the dog, so it's within their possession more. The other person is then going to come in behind the dog with a second toy and usually agitate the dog by tapping them on the side with the second toy until the dog releases that toy and bites the second toy. As soon as the dog bites the second toy, I'm going to let go of the second toy, and the dog is allowed to maintain, obtain, and get that toy. So what I'm teaching the dog, where I'm teaching the dog an out like that, is I'm teaching the dog, if you out, then you will get to obtain this thing. This thing becomes yours. You get to have it. Now, I've seen a lot of dogs be taught the out that way, where they don't have any desire to obtain and possess and parade. And I've seen lots of people, especially with certain lines of German Shepherd, who are told then, oh, hold the dog's head up and let them parade, like make them parade the toy. And some dogs just don't have any motivation for parading, and they just drop the toy. They're like, I'm not interested in that. It's not about that for me. That's not the fun part of it for me. So with dogs like that, I would prefer to teach the out with a rebite. So the dog bites the toy, the person moves their hands towards the dog so that the dog can't get any fight or any purchase, so that they play with it first, and then they move the hands towards it and hold it as still as they can, normally in a place where they've got lots of stability so that they're not moving around. So the dog doesn't get any fun from this at all. And as soon as the dog even just begins to lift its mouth off, we say yes and allow the dog to have full purchase of it, fight again, and then we hold it. And so we kind of shape it like that until you can go out and the dog lets go, ready to get that rebite, fight, out, and then we can improve how much resistance, how much arousal, etc., to proof it against all that arousal. Third type of dog, your pit bulls or your bullies, and the dogs that even when you try and reduce any purchase, they will find a way of being able to grab and hold, and the grabbing and holding is brilliant for them. So even if you put your hands right down there and you hold it here for ages, they'll stay there for an hour if they want, because actually they're still getting the bit of the sequence that they really enjoy just by holding on. With those dogs, I tend to do two toys. So that means I'll send the dog on to grab one toy. As soon as they grab that one toy, I'll let go of that one toy. So they haven't got the ability to grab and hold it. I'll then say out and immediately present a second toy for them to grab. And then I'll keep doing that, and we'll work on like a rotation of that, starting to give the dog more and more ability to play and tug. And then I'll start to use the expectation that I've now built up that I'm going to throw and release a second toy. So I'm then going to hold the dog on to the first toy. So they're going to run, they're going to grab hold of the first toy. I'm going to hold on to it. I'm then going to get the second toy and show them that I'm about to throw that toy and go out and see if the expectation of me throwing the second toy is enough, is been built enough for the dog to go, she's going to do the second one now, and then I'll put the second toy down for the dog to grab and play with. Good boy, out, and then the second one comes down, and keep messing between those two toys. So I'd use a 2-toy method with one person with 2 toys who's constantly releasing the 2 toys to get the out. But there's lots of variants to those different games. But generally speaking, it's through play and with toys that I'm going to teach the out.
Very good.
I don't think I see people teaching it with like punishment knee collar and stuff, and I just don't think it's effective. It's completely unnecessary. And I think it teaches so much conflict in the biting. It teaches so much conflict in the playing. I think it's one of those things that's so misused and so silly. I think it teaches dogs to be more possessive, but also to have a lot of conflict in that bite, a lot of conflict in that out, a lot of apprehension about outing at the right time. And often, especially in PSA, this is where I've seen it being taught with the e-collar the most. It just drives me mad because we've spent the dog's whole life teaching the dog that you need to push through adversity. So if there's something that's scary and big in your way, you need to have the confidence to push through it in order to get to what you want. And we teach these dogs to see any adversity as something that should be sought and then pushed through. And then we apply an e-collar when they're biting. And obviously the dogs tend to go, oh, this is more pressure that I need to push through. So they just bite harder and harder. And it kind of is completely away. Like, it's exactly what we've taught them not to do. So we've taught them, like, don't ever give in to pressure, push into pressure, go through adversity, and then we apply pressure and adversity to the bite, except for we expect them to release it. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't seem to make any sense to the dogs either, which is why I think you see so much redirection and confusion and lack of clarity, and it's completely unnecessary.
I think it really depends on the context in which the adversity is applied and how the dog feels about the whole experience. But yeah, there's definitely some very bad ways to teach the out command. Train your baby like a dog. Could you explain a little bit about what that show was all about? For all those who don't know, and also some of the controversy with the show.
Yeah. So I had done Rescue Dog to Super Dog, which was a Channel 4 show, which was very successful. And then I did Teach a Pet to do that. And then I was asked by Channel 4 to come back and present a show. Now, when I was doing the show, it wasn't called Train Your Baby Like a Dog. It's called The Baby Trainer. And I worked alongside a clinical psychologist, child psychologist, on it was a pilot, and it was we worked on 2 cases where a baby had couldn't sleep. It had never ever been able to settle through the night. I can't remember how old she was. She was maybe 18 months old. She was like older, not a baby. And she had never once been able to sleep through the night. And then a child who was smacking and acting quite violently towards his pregnant mother, who was 6. Very frustrated little boy. And so Channel 4 asked me to come in, and they said, look, what we want you to do is we want you to get cases of dogs that are parallel to the cases with the kids. Show how you would treat the dogs and use the same principles to work with this psychologist to come up with principles to work with these children. And the way that I train is very holistic. So I look at environment and diet and lifestyle and all these sorts of things, alongside having, training protocols to try and get to the root of the problem emotionally before then working out contingencies. And so this is what we did. Chris Williams is a director who's a beautiful director. Like, his style of filming and stuff is gorgeous. He's very reliable in terms of the way he tells the stories and stuff. So we did the show, and I actually really enjoyed doing it. It was great. I used settling at night, separation anxiety protocols for the child, for the little baby. So we did, small increments, but essentially, initially, the first steps were showing the baby that her attachment was secure. So the mum had applied lots of that kind of let the baby cry out type notions, and it just hadn't worked. And it was actually heartbreaking because this baby was in such distress every time the mum left the room, because she was so insecure that the mum wouldn't come back even when she was needed. And so, and also the routine that she had developed before the baby went to bed was just really inappropriate. So we worked on having a really nice routine where she was going to massage the baby with this cream, as well as the food that the baby had, and when the baby had the food, to make sure she had been to the toilet in the right time before the sleeping took place. Physical exercise, mental exercise, emotional stability, all of that type of stuff was all looked at. And then we put in the contingencies of like just increasing the amount of separation that the mother and the child were having in a way that was really appropriate and really and kind of putting the control back in with the child to start with, so that they built up a really secure attachment that the mum would always be there if she was needed. And we worked on that, and within 3 days we had the baby sleeping through the night for the first time, which then went on and the baby slept through the night for 2 weeks. It was beautiful. It was lovely. The other child was just really, really frustrated. So the expectations of the adults was very, very high. The child was only 5 or 6, and they're expecting him to come back from nursery and be able to just like go and play independently without any engagement from the adults for like up to 45 minutes to an hour, which just isn't realistic for a child of that age. So we worked on engagement games that increased independence and rewarded independence. So games where Graydon had to go into different rooms and get items of different colours in order to come back. And we worked on like having a reward chart, and we worked on teaching Graydon reliable ways to communicate, where he was able to actively seek out engagement from his parents rather than go and smash her in the belly with a stick because she wasn't talking to him, because he was so frustrated. We worked a lot with the father of him, who was a very frustrated man and who had very old-fashioned and quite inappropriate expectations of a child of that age. And we also went to the toy shop and got a lot of appropriate toys, because like with a lot of dogs, he didn't have that. They'd got him, he was like 5, and they'd got him like a guitar and a violin and a bunch of like cards of different buildings with the information on, and a lot of quite heavy books. And he didn't have any like little cars and just shit. And they had a really beautiful house, and a lot of it was about, they didn't want him, they wanted toys that looked nice in the house. They didn't want Play-Doh. They didn't want this mess. And so we talked a lot about that. The father collected Star Wars gear, adult toys, but Graydon wasn't allowed to touch them. And he'd got in a lot of trouble in the past, but that's because those toys were so much better than the toys I'd got him. So he went to the toy shop and just bought a load of like really appropriate toys and stuff, and again had really high success rate. So this was all being filmed. It got to filming. We'd finished filming it. We then filmed an advert for it, and Channel 4 then changed the title to Train Your Baby Like a Dog. And when you're working on a show like that, you don't get any say in that sort of thing. Like, that just happens, and it is what it is. And it didn't really bother me. They then made a really controversial advert for it, which, as a joke, they had asked me to, as a joke, we talked about clicker training, and I talked about the fact that I had shaped my baby, Tino, to eat with a knife and fork when he was little, and also to, when he dropped his dummy, to pick it up. So I shaped the mechanic of picking it up and putting it back in his own mouth. And so we talked about that, and we're joking about it. And so they took a tiny shot of me clicking a clicker and Santino sitting, because I was joking, and I was like, Tino, sit, like that. But they used it for the advert, right? Which is typical TV. But it doesn't matter. It was still kind of done in jest, and there was nothing nasty about it. It was fine. And then basically what happened was, a lady was writing a book, and she was just about to publish a book about autism, right? And part of it was going through the history of autism, and it looked to basically look at the fact that they used clicker training and really aversive Skinnerian operant conditioning to try and train out the symptoms of autism. And this is way back. And there's like a really horrible history of using ABA, which is applied behaviour analysis, with autistic children. There's a really horrible history of it. Now, my show had nothing to do with this. It had nothing to do with autism because none of the people within it were suffering with autism. And in addition to that, I wasn't using clicker training with any of the cases, so it wasn't about clicker training either. However, before it aired, before anyone had seen it, even including me, this lady had decided that this would be a fantastic vehicle for her to be able to publicise her book. So she went out and wrote a big press report to Autism Matters, making a petition, and went out to like the Sun newspaper, the Times newspaper, all of this, and basically said, we are calling to ban this television show because it's using ABA training. And she put in this press release that I was removing a blanket from a child every time it cried, which was outlandish. And obviously I wasn't using any techniques like that. Like it was just like what I said it was, really. Like it was all really, really positive. It was all really lovely, lovely training and very family friendly. It was like light entertainment for Channel 4. Like I absolutely would never be taking away a baby's blanket. But anyway, so she had written this in this press release. Obviously she hadn't seen the show because nobody had seen it, not even me. But it just went mad. So people were like, oh my God, that's outrageous that Channel 4 are thinking about doing this. This is absolutely appalling. She managed to get on Good Morning, This Morning, the radio, and this petition managed to get like 30,000 signatures saying Channel 4 to cancel it. So I then had to go on This Morning, Good Morning, Jeremy Vine, all those different shows to kind of defend it. But it was really frustrating because I was like, I'm not really defending it because it hasn't come out yet. Like, just watch it when it comes out and you'll see that it's got nothing to do with that. It's, I did the whole thing with a clinical child psychologist. It wasn't, and somebody from the positive dog training community who doesn't like me, and I know who it was, wrote a complaint to Ofcom before it came out. And it did air. And when it aired, everyone was like, oh, my bad. My bad, got that wrong. But because she had made a complaint to Ofcom, I then had to defend the complaint, which I won, obviously, because everything in it was just absolute rubbish. But it was very frustrating at the time because at the time I was still very much labelled and part of the positive dog training community. And it was frustrating that I was doing my third primetime TV show, pushing this style of training, pushing, this much more empathetic, understanding the animal, ethology-based type style of looking at behaviour. And the very people that I felt should be going like, yes, well done, you're getting this out to the public, were the very people who were going, you're not quite doing it the way I want you to do it. And or like, we're going to agree with whatever they've said, even though it's, even though it's not true. So that's what happened with that show. They then asked me to do a series and I said no. That I wasn't interested in pursuing it in any way, because after that I was a bit done, to be honest. I did end up doing more TV work, but at the time I said, like, I'm not doing any more TV, I'm done, I can't bother with the rubbish that it comes with. But yeah, so that was Baby Trainer.
What's your plans for the future in dog training? So you've got your academy, and what's the plans for the future?
I don't know. It's really hard. So I've got loads that I want to do with the academy. Like, I've got tons to do. I've got loads of content. I've got whole content trees ready to write, and I want to make that the best training resource in the world for dog trainers in terms of continued professional development. And I want to create specific journeys so that people can come on and move through specific courses in a specific order in order to gain particular knowledge and skills. So without a doubt, the academy is here to stay, and that's where I'm focusing most of my time and effort. I have got two other big kind of plans in terms of at some point I would like to start and run a physical dog training centre again in the UK. Not me, I wouldn't be running it personally, even though I'd like to be hands-on, but I would like to handpick staff from around the country, trainers from around the country, to run schools, dog training schools and behaviour schools a certain way, which is very different to the way they're being run at the moment, in a way that I think will be much better for the public. And I'd like to have a say in the curriculum and how that goes in the staff training, and have an army of trainers out there that I can go right down and see those trainers. In addition to that, I have secret sneaky ideas that I can't really tell you about, but what I can tell you about is that I do have another project that I'm working on, which is a little bit like, I guess it's a little bit like better help for dog owners, which I'm excited about, which runs into the other two projects as well. Regulation wise, I get stressed about this all the time. People are constantly asking me whether or not why I don't run any type of accreditation or certification. And I find it really difficult because essentially I don't believe that certification or accreditation is worth the paper it's written on. And that it's just impossible to do something like that. But I have been involved in the steering committee for the government for the last 5 years when it comes to the regulation of trainers. I do think that there could be ways of doing something that means that there's a better lowest benchmark for trainers getting involved in training. But I've kind of stepped away from that a little bit now, just because it's just so complicated. It's so annoying. So on that basis, I personally think we should be self-regulating. I just think we need to self-regulate a lot better. And I do think that CPD and years of experience in the field should be worth more, and that there should be some form of public protection against trainers that, Gary down the road who decided yesterday he was going to be a dog trainer. Although I don't actually think there is nearly as many of them as people think there is. So, yeah, so I would like to do something to help that situation, but I just don't know what. I've got a potential event in Costa Rica in 2026 with another very well-known trainer who trains differently to the way that I train, which would be interesting and very exciting if that goes ahead. I'd like to do a few more conferences, and I have got a Netflix documentary that I'm kind of semi-working on, but it's like really, really early stages, so it hasn't even gone through development team yet. But if that comes to light, that'd be quite nice. So yeah.
Wow, you've really got a lot. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah. And I want to compete in obedience with my Malinois. I've decided I'm going to compete her in obedience. So I've just been working on that.
What kind of competition would that be?
It'd be just obedience, so Kennel Club obedience.
Kennel Club obedience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
no more Mondio Ring sport.
Well, I have been doing
bitey sports.
Yeah, well, I have been doing PSA with her, and my intention was to go for her PDC, but she damaged her teeth last year, her front teeth, her incisors. She's damaged, and she still is biting decoys for fun. But I don't think. Well, I don't know. We'll see how we go. But I'm of the mind that I think that the damage to her teeth is going to cause her some conflict in her bite. So I don't know whether or not she'll enjoy that level of biting competitively, and whether or not she'd do particularly well at it. Whereas obedience is sick, like it's really, really good. So at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm using decoys as and biting as a way of just proofing and improving and polishing her obedience to then obedience her in competition, which is fun. But I'll always do some form of protection with her, because it's what she's born to and it's what she absolutely loves, and it is a breed-specific outlet that's definitely needed for her, because otherwise she gets very frustrated if she hasn't had any form of that type of exercise. So I'll always do a little bit, but just for fun at the moment.
Very nice. Okay, so Jo-Rosie, thank you for coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you would like to add before we end the podcast?
No, not at all. That's all good. That's all good. I'm
Okay.
sure it'll be.
Bye everyone, and thanks for listening to the Super Canine Show with Jo-Rosie Haffenden and me, William Chandler-Duff.